Hi, I'm Jordan Saxby, creator of the Ancient Ones Speak, or Taos for short, a new TTRPG for 1GM and one or more players. Taos is a game about empathy and information. Players will use these to manipulate godlike creatures and change the real human world in the process. Each session, players will encounter an ancient, a psychopomp or living metaphor, intertwined with human life and beliefs, and try and convince this ancient to take a course of action, whose ripple effects will change the human world. Let me show you how it works. Each game of Taos is played using a pattern of handwritten cards on the table, and gameplay is conversation rather than combat focused. Players also require no prep time or rules explanations before you start, as players play alternate versions of themselves, thrust into, at first, a full tutorial campaign. This is one of the encounters from the tutorial. Players are escaping the court of Fae Machina, a faction of Fae fused with ornate metal wiring that represent humanity's relationship between themselves and technology. The players have run out into a corridor. At one end is a door, freedom. At the other is the lock of Fae Machina, their opponent for this round. Every encounter in Taos has three components. The pattern of cards, which represent the conversation, but also the environment being acted upon. The time tracker, which represents the intensity of the encounter, and threat. In this case, the lock herself, but it could be anything ranging from a boredom meter to the temperature of a rising inferno. On their turn, players will collectively decide what they want to say, or one of them can spend a limelight token and dictate rather than collectively decide. But this can be anything, from asking simple questions to... Actually, in one playtest of this encounter, my players ran a long con, using a series of well-placed lies to convince the lock to let them go. But once players have decided what they want to say, they'll move the time totem one step further up the track. And then the Ancient will respond. If the players are on track, if they're hitting the Ancient's motivations or the triggers written on the underneath of these cards and in a table behind the GM screen, the GM might turn a card over, representing progress in the encounter. If they're off track, the GM has a series of clues that they weave into the Ancient's responses. This system not only takes the pressure off the GM, but also helps the encounter to feel fair, as players are engaging with the conversational puzzle box in front of them, rather than just trying to convince a GM that what they're saying is going to work. When the players reach the top of the time track, they'll also get to act. Usually this will be movement or special abilities. And finally, the time track will get reset, and threat will increase. In this case, the lock of Fae Machina will approach our scrappy but ultimately very fragile human players. All of these encounters exist as well in a wider context. Players will willingly or unwillingly make changes on the human world by interacting with the Ancients, and these are tracked game by game on the World Changes sheet. Players will also take interim scenes, where they will join one of 4 development schools, they will interact with, befriend, or maybe even seduce other Ancients in more casual settings, or they will gather information on what Ancients exist, what their domains are, and ultimately how to convince them, because in Taos, good, unbiased information is power. And eventually players will start to dictate the changes they want to create, which Ancients they want to talk to, and what they want to get them to do, to convince them to make jetpacks exist or overthrow a government. We can all think of changes we want to see in the world, and Taos creates a structure for players to explore those changes and the consequences that can come from them. With over 30 members of a starting pantheon, 3 full campaigns, and guidance on how to create your own Ancients and encounters, Taos comes with a large number of hours of gameplay, crafting narratives that test players' empathy and guile as much as it tests their logic and luck. Thank you.